Good morning. Well, today we're going to finish the book of Revelation. This is our last class. I've thoroughly enjoyed this study for my own personal growth. This has just really been a good, it's been good work for me. It's been helpful for me to make my way through the book. I'm not done though. I sort of hate that it's come to a conclusion because there's a lot of other things that I'd like to myself to kind of resolve in my own understanding of the book. But I've really benefited from this study. And Ralph is kind of responsible for making this happen. He really encouraged me to teach the book this quarter. And I love him, and I want to hit him for that. I mean that jokingly. It's because it really has been quite a time investment. But it's been, and one I was a little nervous about going into it, but one that's been very, very helpful to me. And so I'm grateful to Ralph for encouraging me in that direction. I don't feel like I've done the book the justice that I would have liked to have done it, but I hope that it's helped to give you somewhat of a handle on going back and reading the book or talking about the book with folks in the future, so that there's not so that you feel like you have a handle on getting into it, and that it's not a fearful thing to approach a study of the book. Several times, all along the way, I've attempted to go back and sort of tell the story of the book again. And I want to do that one last time, very quickly, before we talk about chapters 20, 21, and 22. And I want to do this because I hope that it helps to kind of give you a framework for putting the different sections of the book. So if you go to chapter 1, take 1, 2, and 3, those three chapters. And here is what I think is the essence of what is communicated in those three chapters. We see the people of God in crisis, the 7 churches in Asia, and they are shown a picture of Jesus, who is portrayed as the commander-in-chief of God's army. And he has the special forces of heaven in his right hand. And what is communicated to them is that Jesus, who's the commander-in-chief, stands with his people. He holds the forces of heaven in his right hand, but his feet are planted with the 7 churches of Asia. He walks among the candlesticks. And so they are given comfort in the face of their crisis. In chapters 4 through chapter 7, we see God's strategy unfurled for dealing with the crisis that God's people are facing. And so we're taken into heaven's situation room, where we see the Father enthroned, and where we see the most powerful creatures in the cosmos that are there as well. And God hands over his master plan to Jesus, who is pictured for us as the lion-hearted lamb. And he is the one who is fully capable of executing that strategy. And so we see then the main thrust of the strategy unfurled beginning in chapter 6 and going through chapter 8. And basically the strategy is this. God is about to, through the power of Christ, he's about to let evil be unleashed on the world. But there's a purpose behind that unleashing of evil that's portrayed as the 4 horsemen. It is going to serve the purpose of separating mankind into 2 camps. Those who are a cling to the altar kind of people, those who cling to the altar where Jesus died, and those who are a people that cling to a broken world. And so God is going to let evil loose on the world, but it's a very purposeful strategy. Pain is going to separate people into 2 camps. Those that cling to the altar and those that cling to the world. And so that's the strategy, broad brushed, in chapters 4 through 8. Well, what are the weapons for the followers of the Lamb? How do the people who cling to the altar, how are they going to live as evil is running rampant on the world? How are they going to fight? What are the weapons of their warfare? And so beginning in chapter chapter 8 and going through chapter 11, we find the weapons of their warfare described. And they are threefold. They are the power of prayer. They are the power of their proclamation of Jesus. And then it's the power of their suffering. And it's those three weapons together that are going to be the undoing of the enemy. Those are the three things that are going to cause the kingdom of Christ to prevail. And those are the things that are going to be the answer to this crisis that the Christians are facing. And so we've seen the crisis in how the commander-in-chief is in charge. We've seen the strategy. And then we see the weapons of the warfare of the people of God as they're utilized. And it's a surprising kind of warfare that the believers are going to fight. But but the promise of victory is given to them with the use of those three weapons of prayer, of their preaching, and then of their suffering, of their sharing in the sufferings of Christ that will bring about judgment on the enemy and that will bring about the conversion of those that are going to be changed as a result of this crisis. Starting in chapter 12 then, 12 and 13, we see a view of the enemy. And so we see that the enemy and his backstory. And so we're introduced to Satan, who is pictured as the dragon, and how this present crisis is the climax of a conflict that goes all the way back to the beginning. This is the culmination of the conflict between the seed of woman and the seed of Satan. And so Satan is depicted as a dragon. And in this present crisis, what he's done is he's raised up an empire that's depicted as a beast in chapter 13. And he's raised up a false religion, emperor worship, that's portrayed as a little beast that looks like a lamb. And so that's the picture of the enemy in chapters 12 and 13. Then from 14 through chapter 20, we find this the judgment or the conquest of the enemy. And the story of the enemy's utter defeat is told 3 times in that sequence of chapters from chapter 14 through chapter 20. The first time it's told in just a few verses. And it's at the end of chapter 14, there's a description of a grape harvest, of grapes being harvested and then the grapes being stomped. And so that's the first picture of the judgment. Then the story of judgment is told again in chapters 15 and 16. And this time it's a story of the pouring out of the bowls of wrath. And so that's a second way in which judgment is told. First time in a few verses. The second time it's told in 2 chapters. And then the third picture of judgment is actually told in 3 stages. There is the judgment on the city of Rome. There's a judgment on the empire and on the emperor worship. And then finally there's the judgment on Satan. So the judgment on the city is told in chapters 17 and 18, where the city is described as a harlot and where the city is burned and all of the merchants and the kings and the sailors and those that are in ships, they all cry in chapter 18 over what's happened. And then in chapter 19 then is that description of how the empire and the little beast, the false prophet that has deceived the world with emperor worship, how they rally their armies and how they are defeated by Christ, who is riding on the white charger. And then finally, after the city's been judged and after the beast has been judged, then there's the judgment on Satan, and that's the story that's told in chapter 20. Then that sets the scene for what we find in chapters 21 and 22, which is the picture of the new creation, the new order that's going to come out of this crisis or this conflict, that I think is a picture of the final residence of the people of God in heaven. But I think the imagery shoots us to final judgment and to the climax and culmination of God's purpose, where all the people of God are portrayed as a new city that is very different from the worldly city that's been judged as seen in the city of Rome. Does that make sense? I hope that gives kind of a framework for how to break up the different parts of the book and the message that is that's a component of each part. Every time I work on different sections, I always learn something new. For instance, look at chapter 19. This is where we talked about this last week, where when the after the city is destroyed, there are two things that are talked about in the judgment on the empire, on the beast. And it's talked about in terms of a wedding supper that everyone's invited to. And then it's also talked about in terms of this, we're expecting to see a bridegroom, but instead what we see is Jesus the warrior who's on the white charger. And so that's the way the bridegroom appears, as Jesus on the steed, and he goes out and he slays the armies whose bodies are then offered up as a sacrifice, and they are eaten or picked apart by the birds of the heavens. The thing that occurred to me this week in looking at this section is the appropriateness of the announcement of the marriage following what's just been described about the destruction of the city of Rome. And this is the thing that occurred to me in that. We talked some last week about the depiction of the city as a harlot. And the thing that I've been so impressed with that I'd never seen before in the book of Revelation is how weak the kings or the emperors of the Roman Empire are portrayed. The Roman emperor was the most powerful person on the earth, you would think, during the time of this crisis. But the way that he's portrayed in Revelation chapter 17 is not a picture of strength, it's a picture of weakness. Who has the real power in the empire is the people in the city. And so the city is pictured as the harlot in chapter 17. And the kings, not just of Rome, but all the kings of the earth, are trying to court her. And they're having this affair with her. But it's not a real relationship. It's a very carnal, it's a very indulgent, it's a very licentious. And so that's the picture of Rome and her emperor, but it's the woman, it's the harlot that is riding the beast, that is and she's the one that turns the heads of the emperor. And so it's just a picture of just how weak the king really is, or the emperor really is. And this kind of relationship that exists between the two. Well, when we get to chapter 19 then, and we see the announcement of the marriage supper of the Lamb, just want you to see the relationship that the people of God have with their king. And it's and here is a bride who is prepared for her husband, and she is beautiful. And he really is the one in charge. And there's not all of these kings that are competing for her affection. There is only one king in her heart. And it is Jesus who is the warrior. And so there's a picture of the people of God and their relationship with their king, and it's one of fidelity, it's one of communion, it's one of all of the beauty that's a part of the marriage covenant, and of the closeness and the intimacy. All of that is pictured as a relationship between God's people or Christ's people and Jesus himself. Very different from the picture of what the city of Rome and her relationship with her king looks like. Do you see the contrast that's there? And I hadn't appreciated that before, but it's a beautiful way of portraying the real status that Jesus has in the hearts of his people versus the status of the kings in the Roman Empire, and of the difference in the relationship between people and their leader. When you contrast what happens in earthly politics and worldly empire, and what a relationship with the king looks like in Christ's kingdom. It's very different. And I just hadn't appreciated how fitting the imagery is in the book. Okay, go to chapter 20 now. Every time we have seen Satan in the book, he is being defeated. He is falling. And so when we were introduced to him in chapter 12 as the dragon, he was all set to devour the child that the woman would bring into the world, the picture of Christ. And he fails at that, and then he's kicked out of heaven because he's conquered by Michael and the armies. And then he fails to kill the woman when he tries to pursue her. And now the city that he's raised up has fallen. Fallen is Babylon the Great. And now the beast that he raised up out of the sea has been in chapter 19. That beast has been, and his armies have been killed, and the false prophet is gone. And so Satan has lost all along the way. And in chapter 20, we find the picture of his judgment. I said to you that in this third picture of judgment, it happens in 3 stages. Don't think in terms of sequence, as if the city of Rome would be judged first, and then the empire Rome would be judged, and then Satan would be judged. All of those are just 3 different ways of looking at the same event of how the enemy is going to be conquered. So we can look at it in terms of the city, we can look at it in terms of the empire, and we can look at it in terms of what happens to Satan. And so here in chapter 20 is the picture of what happens to Satan. John sees an angel that comes down from heaven, and he's got the key to the abyss, and he takes Satan and he binds him up with the chain, and he throws him in the pit, and he closes the pit over him, and he locks it up, or he seals it. And we're told that for 1,000 years the pit is sealed. And along with this binding of Satan for the 1,000 years, all of the people of God are those who have been martyred and those who have been slain. And I think it pictures the two together. I think it pictures saints still living along with those that have been martyred. And they are all elevated to sit on thrones and to reign with Jesus for those 1,000 years. And so the people of God, while Satan is bound, are pictured as sitting on thrones of judgment and ruling with Christ for 1,000 years. At the end of that period of 1,000 years, the pit is opened and Satan is freed. And he does what he just did in the book. He goes out and he deceives the nations again. And the picture of the deceiving of all the nations is a picture drawn from Ezekiel 38 and 39, where there is the description of this kingdom that's called Magog, and her king is called Gog. And so Gog and the kingdom Magog have this immense army that come against the people of God, and there's no battle. They surround the people of God, and it looks like the people of God are done for, and then God judges Gog and Magog, and they are utterly destroyed. And so that picture that's drawn from Ezekiel 38 and 39 is portrayed here. Of Satan is loosed, he goes and deceives the nations. He brings them in this immense army that's like the sand of the sea. They surround the people of God, and then fire comes from heaven. We've seen that picture before of Elijah fire. Fire comes from heaven, and it consumes the enemy, and they're all destroyed. And then Satan now is taken, and he's thrown into the lake of fire, where we've already seen the beast thrown and where we've already seen the false prophet thrown. And so Satan's judgment is reserved for that period of time. Okay, so what's the meaning of all that? What's the point of what John is seeing in that? Because we would expect that if the city was destroyed or judged, and if the beast was judged and the false prophet, then we would expect that the one who is the mastermind behind it all, we would think that he would be destroyed right away too. But that's not the story that's depicted to John. Instead, it's the picture that Satan is going to be defeated. He is going to be bound for this period of 1,000 years, but he's going to be loosed again. And so God is not, out of this crisis, God's purpose for how He is allowing Satan to work in the world is not finished. There's still something more to do before he's finally going to be judged. One other element that I left out in that description is the picture in verse 5 of chapter 20, where it talks about how those that were dead, who were slain in this conflict, were put on thrones. There's the description of the first resurrection in that, and so just want you to see that the 1,000-year reign of the people of God with Christ is also pictured as being the first resurrection here. I think the scene that's shown to us here in chapter 20 is one that we've already seen in the book, and really more than once. But go back, if you would, just to illustrate what I mean by that. Go back to chapter 11. Go back to chapter 11. And you remember when we spent a good bit of time actually in this section of the book, because I think it's one of the hardest parts, but I think it's also one of the really key parts of the book for the people of God understanding how they're to behave in the midst of crisis. And remember in chapter 11, there's the depiction of the whole people of God are portrayed as two prophets. And when we look at the details of what happens there, the two prophets that they're portrayed as are Moses and Elijah. And so Moses and Elijah and their character and their ministry is a way of summarizing what the followers of the Lamb, how they're to behave in the midst of crisis. And it also describes what's going to happen to them. There's going to be 3.5 years that corresponds with the ministry, the length of Jesus' ministry. They're going to have a time where they preach and where they suffer, and when ultimately they're going to be slain. And then there's the description at the end of that chapter of how after they are slain, they're going to be resurrected 3.5 days later, and their enemies are going to watch them ascend into heaven, and then the enemy is going to be annihilated. I think the picture in Revelation chapter 20 is just another way of telling the same story. Here in chapter 11, it's the story of these two prophets, but they represent the people of God. And they represent the way that they're going to suffer and the way that they're going to be victorious, and how this victory is going to not only, it's not just that they're going to emerge from this with keeping their faith and with eternal reward, but that the victory is going to be that people are going to be changed by their prayer and their proclamation and their suffering, the way Jesus suffered. That this is going to bring about the conversion of others, and it's going to bring about their ultimate triumph. Revelation chapter 20 is another way of picturing the same kind of thing, that ultimately what's going to happen out of this is that there is not going to be a kingdom that is a rival to Christ's kingdom. And that's the way this story out of this crisis with Rome is going to end, is that there is no rival. Satan has been shown out of this to be impotent. And the way that it's communicated is with this unrivaled reign of Christ, where every enemy now, every enemy in terms of this worldly empire has been vanquished. We still got to deal with death. We still got to deal with Hades. And we've still got to deal with the ultimate destruction of Satan. But Satan has been shown to be powerless over Christ and over his people. And so that is portrayed as this 1,000-year reign in which we are victorious. And we don't take the reign any more literal than we do the 1,260 days or the 42 months. That was just a way of depicting the fact that there would be suffering for a little while. But now there is victory for a long while. There is victory that is absolute. There's victory that's total. But Satan is going to be loosed again. for a little season. And when he's loosed for this little season, he's going to deceive the nations. But the way the story is going to end is going to end with judgment, where he is cast into the lake of fire, and where those that are the opposition to the people of God are destroyed by fire from heaven, without any kind of great battle. Now, where does that put us in the midst of this scene with the binding of Satan, and with 1,000 years, and with the loosing of Satan at the end? I've struggled with the right way to portray what I've come to understand in going over this, and I've thought of two different perspectives, and I'm not sure. I've got some leaning in one direction. So let me just tell you what the two possibilities are that I've come to in reading this section. One possibility is that we are living in the period of this 1,000 years. That what happened with the defeat of Satan and with the triumph of Christ and His kingdom is that we live in a time where the way that we're to see the world is that Satan has been defeated, and Christ's kingdom is victorious, and we are now, as His people, reigning with Him. And the only thing that's to come is this final release of Him, where He will be released, where He will deceive the nations, and He will be judged. Which says that we're in a period of time that's going to end with a loosing of Satan, and then His judgment, and the judgment of those that are His armies. A second possibility is that we're not to look at this 1,000 years in terms of a time period that we try to figure out if we're living in that. Are we living in the 1,000 years, or are we living in the time where Satan has been loosed? And what we're to see is in this just a parable or a picture of just what the human experience is going to be after the defeat of Satan. And I think every generation where there are righteous people sees the work of Satan going on in their world, and experiences, witnesses how he deceives. And I think the message of comfort that's being given, if this perspective is right, is that God is taking care of the great enemy in destroying the empire of Rome. And whatever other enemy that He raises up, even if it's Gog and Magog, if it's an army that looks like it's as big as the sand of the seashore, it's not going to be a problem. It's not going to be a crisis. God is going to take care of His people, so that if Satan deceives the nations and raises up a foe against the people of God, that foe is going to be utterly taken care of the same way that this foe was. And so the picture then is just one of, this is the way the story is going to go anytime a new enemy rises up. They may look like like Satan is doing something. It may look like he's powerful, but he's not. And so the picture that the people of God need to carry in their heads is the picture of the fact that they are a part of the reign of Christ, the kingdom of Christ, and there is no rival power. There is no rival authority. Any foe that raises itself up against the people of God is going to suffer utter defeat. Now, after wrestling with all of that, I think the latter picture is what's being told here. Is that story of comfort that anytime we face a foe, that we're going to find that we're going to find victory if we trust in God, regardless of which one it is. The message is the same. The message is the same. The way that we are to understand ourselves as the people of God is that we are victorious over Satan. And he is not going to bring any kind of threat or power that will overcome the power of the Lamb. He will be defeated. And where it's going to end up is in his judgment, where he is totally destroyed. Any questions or any comments about any of that? I'm not satisfied with my explanation of that. It's not as a good indication that you've not really mastered something is if it takes you a long time to explain it. And so if you really have gotten something down, then you can usually say it pretty concisely. And I can't say it very concisely yet, which means that I haven't really gotten that material the way that I want to understand it. But that's the best that I can do with it where I am today. Okay, let's then move to the latter part of chapter 20, where it says, look at verse 10, it says, the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are also, and they will be tormented day and night forever. And then we see the picture of judgment. And I think the scene here is one of final judgment. I think there's been a merging of the Christians that are in Asia Minor are showing how their present conflict fits into the whole cosmos, into the whole scheme of God's plan. We've had scenes that took us all the way back to the beginning and the conflict between the seed of woman and the seed of Satan. And now we have a picture that takes us all the way to the end. And how it is that that Satan, who is responsible for what they're facing right now, for raising up this empire and raising up this false prophet, Satan is going to be judged. And every enemy of the people of God is ultimately going to be vanquished. And all of that takes place in the judgment scene that's depicted at the end of chapter 20. He sees a great white throne. And so we're back in the throne room where we started in Revelation chapter 4. And there the dead are raised, small and great, and they stand before the throne, and books are opened. And everyone is judged according to their deeds that are written in the book. And the book of life is opened. And the book of life is the book that records the roll call of the redeemed. These are the names that God has put down of the people that belong to Him. Through the book, the people that belong to Him not only have their name written in the book, but they have His name written on them. And so the people that are written in the book are the same people that through the book of Revelation have been portrayed as having the name of God on their foreheads. They are people that know that they belong to Him, and He knows that they belong to Him. And so He looks at the names and they're judged as to whether or not they are in the book or not. And then not only has already Satan has been thrown into the lake of fire, but death and Hades are thrown into the lake of fire in verse 14. And anyone who's not found written in the book of life is thrown into the lake of fire. Now that judgment is complete, we can have the picture of the new order that's brought about with the vanquishing of Satan and with the demise of every enemy of the people of God. And it's such a powerful, this is one of my favorite sections in the Bible, chapters 21 and 22 of Revelation. And it's stunning to me that the book of God doesn't end with an ending. The book of God ends with a beginning. And so what we find in chapters 21 and chapter 22 is the picture of the new beginning. And it's pictured as a creation story where God creates a new heavens and a new earth. And it's going to be a new heavens and a new earth where God and man will dwell together. And in order to communicate that, all of the wonderful pictures that have been used throughout the Bible in order to describe the special relationship of God's people with God, all are come together into this composite picture. We saw when we looked at the beast in Revelation. I'm getting all the chapters are mixed up now. I think chapter 13. But anyway, we saw it was a composite, and the people of God are pictured as a composite. But it's just as ugly as that one was. This one is beautiful. And so the people of God and their relationship with God in this new creation are pictured as a city and pictured as a bride. And there's the picture of a garden here. And there's a picture of this mountain that is 1,500 miles high. And there is a picture of them as a kingdom and how they reign here. The people reign here. The citizens are kings and queens. They are part of the royalty. And they are family. And so all of those beautiful pictures come together. The picture of a beautiful city, the picture of a garden, the picture of a bride, the picture of a family, the picture of a mountain, the picture of a kingdom. And so all of those are merged together to describe different things about the wonderful relationship and communion and residence that the people of God will have with God and with the Lamb. And so there is everything about unfettered access, because the city, one image I left out is the city of a temple. The city is also a holy place. It's a temple. And so the temple is where God lives. But guess what? We live there too. We live in the temple with God. And so it's a city that's also it's also a temple. So all of these beautiful pictures all are married together here. And they all say something different about the quality of life that is enjoyed forever with the people of God. And so the garden makes us think of every kind of beautiful vista that we ever see in the world here. Whether it be our own little garden or our own little flowers that we grow, or beautiful gardens that we've seen, or beautiful landscapes or beautiful countryside. But ultimately it goes all the way back to the paradise that God made in the beginning, before sin had messed everything up and before corruption had come in. And so here's this pristine garden where there is beauty, and there's all the sustenance that's needed, and it's refreshing, and there's rest because God is there, and the people of God live with God in His garden. But it's a garden that's also a city, and there are great things about cities. And so here is a place where the city and the country are not in conflict, but where you can have the best of both in one place. And so there's a city that we think about with all of its refinements and with all of its with civilization at its highest, at its zenith. But every time we built a city, they all became like Rome. I mean, all of our cities have been just like Rome, or just like Babel, the first city. They've all gone bad. And here's a city that doesn't go bad because God is the one that built it. And so a lot of the elements, if you go back and read Genesis 1 and 2, describes about in the garden how the gold of that land was good, and how there was bdellium, and now there are all these minerals and resources. A lot of the imagery is pulled out of Genesis into these last two chapters in Revelation. But here, they've all been built into a city. All of those raw resources have now been refined in this new creation. God has taken them and He's constructed something. He's constructed a place where He and man dwell together. And so it's a garden, but it's a garden that's also a city. And the bride relationship speaks about the level of intimacy that there is with God and His people, and the closeness and their preparation for this, and the celebration that's a part. Because what is more celebratory? What is more than a wedding, than a marriage covenant? What's more wholesome than that? What relationship is deeper and closer and more intimate? And so that's the picture of the relationship of the people of God and the Father and Jesus. So all of those get blended in the scene that's depicted here. Some things are absent, like there's no sea in the new heavens and the new earth. Because the sea has been the source of so much. These are not pictures that are intended to give us understanding of the metaphysical quality of the new heavens and the new earth, in terms of whether or not there's water there. I mean, there's water in the terms of the rivers of the water of life. The symbol is intended to communicate a principle or a character of that place. And what is absent there is anything like the sea that is a threat to us. There is no uninhabitable place in heaven because we can't live in the sea. And the sea is unfriendly to us. There is nothing like that. There's no uninhabitable place, and there's nothing that's unfriendly to man and to his incorruptible existence in the presence of God there in this place. And so some of those absent things are intended to communicate that. Streets are made of gold, and gates are made of pearl, and the tree of life blooms in every season, and the leaves of the trees are for the healing of the nation. It is 1,500 miles wide and 1,500 miles deep and 1,500 miles high. 2,250,000 square miles is this city that's bigger than any nation we know, bigger than any continent. It's huge. And it's the city which just says that this vastness, this abundance is available to the people of God. And all of those images say something about the existence there. Incorruptible pathways. Streets made of gold. Yes, Flynn? I do think it's real. I don't think that necessarily says what it will actually look like, except to say that it's a real place, not an imaginary place. And we shouldn't think of like sticking our hands through walls and of things floating in clouds. I think the imagery is all intended to communicate that heaven is not something that is less real than our experience here, but something that is more real. And so we need to think of something denser, heavier, more real, more substantial than anything. And where things that are precious here are very commonplace there. So that we don't bake bricks in heaven. We don't make them out of clay. We make them out of gold. And so the most precious things are commonplace there, which is just another way of communicating the kind of abundant life that will be enjoyed in the presence of God. Yeah.
I understand why you asked that question.
Sure.
John said he saw a new heaven and a new earth.
Right.
I think he saw
Yes.
a new earth.
Right.
The way it's supposed to be.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's a picture of what it's going to be. I don't know how else to say that. And when we see it, the picture here will fit what we see and what we experience there.
When Christ rose from the dead, he was with his disciples and he cooked fish. They ate breakfast together. And in heaven, he has all these fruit trees. So I know there's going to be enjoyment of eating there.
Right.
So that makes me know that we'll have new bodies.
Right. Yeah. We know for sure that the experience of the people of the redeemed will be a bodily experience. That's the whole idea of resurrection. It's not just that our spirits are going to come to life again. It's that we're going to have a body that our spirit inhabits in the new heavens and the new earth. And I think part of the purpose of Jesus eating the meat and that sort of thing was not only to give them evidence of His real resurrection, but also to communicate the truth that our resurrection will be a bodily one, that it will be one that is where we have a body, as opposed to not having one and just being a spirit or something that doesn't have a body. Okay, well, that's it. Thank you all for how you've given your attention and your time and your heart to what we've studied together in the book of Revelation.